This is a Renegade Media Network podcast.
Let me tell you guys about a sponsor of this show, and that is Zippix toothpicks. They are wonderful flavored toothpicks that have nicotine in each one. You can find them at zippixtoothpicks.com. A lot of you are probably trying to kick a bad habit here in the new year. These are a great alternative to that habit. And come on, let's face it. They're sponsoring this show, so you know that's a good thing. But I'm telling you, they're the cheapest alternative on the market. They've got flavors. Let me tell you, right here, I've got my packet. Zippix toothpicks, spearmint spice. I love this flavor. They've got whiskey flavor. They've got clove flavor. They want to sponsor shows like mine, so that should make you want to give them some business. They've got a promo code, a new one with the Counterflow podcast. The promo code is BUCK, B-U-C-K, of course. So go to Zippix Toothpicks. That promo code, BUCK, will get you 10% off of your order. Once again, zippixtoothpicks.com, promo code BUCK for 10% off your order. They're delicious. They got just the right amount of nicotine in them, and you will enjoy them. Kick that nasty habit, and let's get to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, cause I call him the hologram brass, but I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquids, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus, but I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
Hey, thank you guys for being here once again, but this is a special bonus edition of the Counterflow podcast. It's timely, of course. You guys know that, most of you know, I'm in Lockhart, Texas, and if you've paid any attention to what's going on in the world, you know that it's just been a winter wonderland here. Some people might call it a terrible hellscape, but whatever the case may be, there's been a lot of blackouts. There's been rolling blackouts. A lot of people have been without power for days. It's been pretty horrible for a lot of people. I do appreciate people checking in on me and writing me and all of that kind of thing. We've been very fortunate here. I had the actual real rolling blackouts where I live, and about every 2 hours, the power would go off for 20 minutes and then it was back on. And we've had water the whole time. So I have been fortunate. My heart goes out to those listening who have not been as fortunate, because that's been a lot of people here in my state. So scrambling around, trying to find an expert on the topic of what's really happened here in Texas, I landed upon a real gem, because how appropriate to find a brilliant author who wrote a book called Shorting the Grid, The Hidden Fragility of Our Electric Grid. And what timing to find her, because she writes about and speaks about precisely what happened here in Texas. Before it even happened, she's been interested in this subject for a long time. So I've got Meredith Angwin on the show. Let me give you a brief rundown of basically her background and who she is. As a working chemist, Meredith Angwin headed projects that lowered pollution and increased reliability on the electric grid. Her work included pollution control for nitrogen oxides in gas-fired combustion turbines and corrosion control in geothermal and nuclear systems. She was one of the first women to be a project manager at the Electric Power Research Institute. She led projects in renewable and nuclear energy. Basically, now we're going to get to her because she kind of gives a bit of her bio when we get into this.
The book is called Shorting the Grid, The Hidden Fragility of Our Electric Grid. The author is with us today, Meredith Angwin. Meredith, welcome to the show. Your topic is quite timely. I'm down here in Texas. Good to have you on.
I'm glad to be on, and thank you so much for inviting me. I was interviewed by another person in Texas recently, Robert Bryce, and he was saying, "Oh, it's so great to have the power back."
Yes, I watched that interview. Yeah, he's just up the road, about 45 minutes from me, so we went through some similar things. What I went through here was the actual rolling blackout. It was on the dot, every 2 hours, 20 minutes, we're out. And unfortunately, I know there's a lot of people in Austin that basically were blacked out for 2 days, and they're probably thinking that's not quite rolling. I want to get to what the heck has happened here in my state, but first, let's introduce you to my audience. Talk about what you do and give them a brief rundown of your latest book.
Okay, well, I got a master's degree in chemistry, and began working for various research projects for the utility industry. I worked on pollution control and on corrosion control. And that's what chemists work on. And I became one of the first women project managers at the Electric Power Research Institute. Interesting thing about that was that I started in the Electric Power Research Institute in renewables. And after a while, I got kind of like, well, I don't know that these are really going to get us very far. And by then I was working with some people on a corrosion issue over in nuclear, because it was similar to a corrosion issue. I mean, pipes are pipes, and when they had an opening, they invited me over, and so I've really basically been mostly in nuclear ever since. Now, in terms of the book, I moved to Vermont from California. I moved to Vermont because our grandkids live fairly nearby. Not that we can see them nowadays, but still, and I wanted to be somewhat active in energy things and so forth. And I began a blog in favor of keeping Vermont Yankee Power Plant open. The blog was called Yes, Vermont Yankee Nuclear Plant. And somebody read the blog, and he contacted me, and he said, "Hey, Meredith, have you ever thought of joining the Consumer Liaison Group Coordinating Committee? You should run for that office." I said, have I ever thought? I don't even know what you're talking about. So it turned out that I had been writing things about how the grid decisions affected Vermont Yankee, and the Consumer Liaison Group is associated with the grid operator as an outreach group. And so he asked me if I wanted to become a member of their coordinating committee, and I said yes. And I was a member of the coordinating committee for 4 years. And that's when I actually learned about the grid, because I was going to these meetings with presentations that most people don't get to hear. I mean, the meetings we were going to were open to the public, but most of the meetings on the grid, and I went to a couple of those by invitation, are not open to the public and not open even to reporters. And it's a very close system. So I began thinking that some things that happen is, like, for example, the power plant, like a coal plant or a nuclear plant, says the trouble is that our reliability is not honored by the grid operators. And everybody goes and says, oh yeah, sour grapes, whatever. And I decided I had to write something that explained exactly what this means. And it's very, very hard to explain, because it's layers and layers of stuff that you say it's a market. No, it's not a market. I mean, and basically, I thought one of the people who wrote a comment on my book, a review of it on Amazon, was just, I thought, boy, I wish you'd been here when I was writing the book, because what he said was that the complexity is a feature, not a bug. The complexity makes it very hard for outsiders to know what the heck is happening. And I feel like the title of my book is The Hidden Fragility of Shorting the Grid, the hidden fragility of our electric grid. And the word hidden is important. But when he said the complexity is a feature, not a bug, I thought, yes. Anyway, so that's about it. If you want me to talk more about Texas, I'm perfectly delighted to do so.
Yeah, and I've been doing a ton of research in the last 48 hours, really, and a lot of it had to do with watching some of the stuff, the content that you've put out there and that others have put out with you, and it's starting to finally kind of sink in of what's going on with these RTOs. Renewables and reliability and all of these words I keep hearing, it's starting to finally sink in. There's a lot of debate online and social media forums on what's going on here in Texas. And I feel that a lot of it's almost like a cartoon version. It's there's the green people and we have to have all renewables versus the greedy coal people and natural gas and this kind of thing. I want to get into more nuanced details of what's happening. What's your summation before we get into the weeds here? What's a general summation of what went wrong here in Texas and why?
Well, the general summation is that when a grid goes to renewables plus natural gas, when that dominates the grid becomes fragile. That's my summation of it. The renewables come on and off when they want to, and so you'll have them if you have them, okay? And I thought one of the things I saw on Twitter was really funny, where somebody says renewables were actually, the wind turbines were actually doing better than expected recently, but nevertheless better than expected was only about 10% of what they could put out. And one guy on Twitter says, well, that's because we grade wind turbines on a curve. I thought that's brilliant. The idea is we don't expect them to be reliable. So, but we want a reliable grid. So how do we, if you get a lot of wind turbines on it, what do you do to back them up? Well, you back them up with natural gas. And why natural gas? Well, the thing is that you need something that comes on quickly. You know, the wind died down, whoop, got to come on quickly. And a gas turbine is basically an internal combustion system, okay? It's more like your car. You're going to turn it on, you know, while a nuclear plant or a coal plant is more like, I don't know, in Star Trek, you know, Scotty, how's it going? And we're getting there, you know. In other words, they're comparatively slow to come up to speed because you're raising steam, you're warming up the system. It's not like your car, you turn on the engine and you're ready to go. So there they are. They bring in a lot of natural gas, and so you have renewables and natural gas. The trouble is you don't store natural gas at the site. You have to bring it in on a pipeline, and that's a vulnerability. And in Texas, frankly, you could have done a better job of winterizing your pipelines. Okay, I don't want to, but nevertheless, here we are in New England, okay, and we're getting overly dependent on natural gas. And our grid operator did a set of scenarios of what could go wrong and what would happen. And in many of the scenarios, there would be rolling blackouts. And one of the what could go wrong thing, a major compressor on a pipeline fails. You see, that's one of the what could go wrong things that could lead to rolling blackouts in New England. So as soon as you're overly dependent on just-in-time delivery of natural gas, then you've got this vulnerability. And when Rick Perry came in as the Department of Energy head of the Department of Energy, he was trying to get the grid operators to give credit, a kind of credit for plants to store fuel on site because they could be there even if other things were going wrong. And you've seen that basically the nuclear plants did very well, much better than the natural gas plants did, and coal plants do well and so forth. So Rick Perry got widely attacked by people who said, oh yeah, he's coming in to save coal. We don't need this kind of stuff. But really, Texas has coal. Texas has natural gas. I mean, Rick Perry wasn't trying, Texas has nuclear. Rick Perry wasn't trying to bash any one of Texas's kinds of power fuel sources. He was just trying to say, if you don't have fuel on site, your grid becomes fragile. And I very much be that. I call it a slide. Let me explain what I mean by that. I feel that grids in the RTO areas, and we can get more into that in a few minutes, in areas where the grid is run like ERCOT runs it, they slide toward fragility. That is, they're dependent on renewables and just-in-time natural gas. And as they get more dependent on renewables and just-in-time natural gas, it will take less and less of a perturbation to bring them to a problem area. So if you say, oh yeah, well, this is unprecedented, this really cold spell in Texas, of course things would go wrong. Well, yeah, but it might go, if you keep going with just-in-time natural gas and renewables and not really working hard to weatherize the natural gas and so forth, maybe it won't take as big a hit to bring this sort of thing happening again. I mean, in New England, they didn't assume anything except a compressor failure in one of their scenarios.
You're touching upon something I believe that you call the fatal trifecta. And,
Yes.
and just to clear it up for the audience, when you're saying, well, the first one, let's go through each one, because I've now kind of learned some of this terminology and I'm getting caught up in it, and I want to make sure and break each one down, each part of this trifecta, for the listeners, so they understand kind of what's really going on with each step.
Okay. The fatal trifecta, I didn't bring it up too much here because I know that Texas has made a decision not to be connected to its neighbors' grids.
Okay.
That is a Texas decision. And so let me go through the fatal trifecta. The fatal trifecta, the first one is overdependence on renewables. And I say overdependence. I used to work in renewables, and renewables can be very helpful. But if you have an overdependence on them, the only thing that can back them up is natural gas. So you have these two things, and they both come on. The renewables come on when they're available, and the natural gas comes on at the moment you need it. Now, you understand that electricity has to be made at the moment you need it. There are not really extensive batteries, okay? People have this idea that batteries back it up. But you can back up your home with a Tesla, but you can't back up the entire grid with a Tesla. I mean, I have stuff about that in my book. I don't want to get too far into it. Now, a lot of people have said to me, they talked to me in the past few days and said, well, you know, Texas, they just broke off from their neighbors. Now, if they had their neighbors, they could have been rescued. This wouldn't have happened to them. Now, I don't know the grid interconnections for the neighbors too well, but I do know one thing. A weather system does not respect state boundaries. If you're in trouble, your neighbors are probably in trouble. If you're having trouble meeting load because your gas lines are having problems and your wind turbines are freezing up, your neighbors have the same set of problems. And so basically, I want to say that people kept saying, well, it's not Texas. Oh, I mean, I've had people interview me from all over the place, including Russia.
Wow.
And yeah, I didn't even know there was a thing called Sputnik News till they contacted me. But what I mean is that, you know, if you're interviewed by someone in the North, they may be like, yeah, Texas, give me a break. But they just decided not to be connected. No. If you were connected, it probably would have done you very little good, especially the depth of the situation. And I want to tell you how I kind of learned this and why I put it in the fatal trifecta. In 2013, I believe, we had a real polar vortex in New England, and we get a lot of power from Hydro-Quebec. And I was watching all this, you know, on the announcements, the real-time statistics they put on the web. And I thought, whoa, we're only getting half the power from Hydro-Quebec that we get ordinary times. They're only sending us half the power. And it turned out that was because they had to serve people in Quebec, and they weren't nearly as concerned about New England. So then, you know, time went by, I wrote about this. Somebody called me up and said, hey, you'd like to be in the consumer liaison group. I joined the consumer liaison group. And then I began to find out other things. For example, Hydro-Quebec only takes on an obligation for half the amount of power that it sends to New England. So if it's sending half, it's good. And the rest, it's up to them. If they send it down here and they make money, they're happy. If they need it at home and they keep it at home, they're happy. We're not happy. You see, so the thing is that people keep saying, well, if Texas was connected, and I think we're connected with Hydro-Quebec, we have contracts with Hydro-Quebec, and Hydro-Quebec protects its citizens in Quebec before it begins worrying about what's happening in Boston.
Okay, so that's, I think if I've got this right, that's the third part of the trifecta. Is okay, and so it's not necessarily a factor here in Texas because, like you said, Texas does have its own separate grid. But to speak to the people that are saying, which I've seen online, that's what they get for being independent on their own. Now they can't handle it. That it's not necessarily the case that if we were connected to our neighbors, it would have done anything to help this situation. And
Exactly.
so the first part, then, too much reliability on renewables. And then the second part is relying on natural gas when we all of a sudden need it, which you can't necessarily do in bad situations, correct?
Yes, that's right. Now let me talk a little about, I think we understand the renewables thing. The wind is up or the wind is not up. You think that your wind turbines are likely to be iced and you put in a lot of money to make sure that they can run in cold weather, or you think, hey, I'm in Texas, and you don't do that, and then they're not running in cold weather. Okay, but let's talk a little more about natural gas. Natural gas is delivered through pipelines to the power plant. Now there are storage facilities of caverns and things for natural gas, but they're not at the power plant. You still have that pipeline between those natural gas and the power plant. And the pipeline can only carry so much gas at a time. One of the things that happens in the winter is that houses begin using a lot more natural gas. They might use, a house might use one unit, say, I'm just going to call a unit of natural gas to heat itself when the temperature is 40 out, okay? And now when the temperature is 10, they can use 3 units of natural gas. Everywhere you go, the houses have priority on getting natural gas. The idea is that a home, doesn't have all kinds of clever ways to back up not being able, but a power plant could keep other kinds of fuel on site. For example, a natural gas-fired power plant, if it had oil on site, many of them are what's called dual fueled. They can shoot in oil to burn when they can't get natural gas. Mm-hmm. So that's why houses have priority. One of the problems is that when the house has priority and there's a lot of natural gas going to houses, much more than usual. Remember, it used to be 40 and now it's 10. Mm-hmm. Or in our case, it's most of the time 20 and now it's minus 20 up in Vermont. and there's a lot going, that the power plants can't get the natural gas. The pipeline won't carry enough for both the houses and full use of the power plant. So some of the power plants are forced to go offline. Another thing that happens is that the natural gas gets so expensive because it's so in demand that some of the power plants go and like, I'll go broke if I begin buying this, I'm going to go offline. And this is another problem with the RTO areas, mm-hmm. which is the areas like ERCOT and ISO New England, where everything is going by auction. Mm-hmm. The power plants are what's called merchant generators. That is, their obligation is to be online and sell power when they can. Now, you understand in the old days of integrated utilities, that utility had an obligation to serve you. And they would be fined if they went offline a lot. There was no percentage to them to say, well, I'm sorry, we're doing a blackout. But now there is a percentage. If the gas is too expensive and too many power plants make the business decision they're not going online, well, then there can be a blackout, because it's just a really weird situation, in my opinion, to be so cavalier, to have no responsibility for reliability. Now, let me tell you another story from my book, but it's true. ISO New England looked at the situation in 2013 and said, you know, we're going to ask all the power plants to store oil on site, and many of them. And many of them will say, I don't want to spend the money. I don't even know if you're going to call on me. Is your operator absolutely guaranteed to call on me? And anyway, so ISO New England said, look, we understand that storing oil is a risk for you and not necessarily going to pay off. So we're going to buy the oil, and then if you use it, it is more complicated than that, but basically we're going to underwrite the cost of that oil. And if you don't use it, you're not going to lose money. And if you use it, of course, you'll be selling your power at high prices, and you'll be happy. Well, it turned out that FERC looked at this and said, oh, you don't understand, ISO New England. You're not supposed to favor one fuel over another. You got to stop that program and do something market-based. You got to treat all fuels the same. And of course, so ISO New England put in this very complicated formula. I mean, it was complicated. It was made up by committees for if you have a capacity payment from us and you don't come online, you have to give a portion of your capacity payment to someone who did come online, unless it's the weekend. I mean, it was the most insane thing you've ever seen. And it was called pay per performance, and it basically wasn't very workable. But what I'm trying to say is that ISO New England was twisting itself on knots to try and set up a series of payments and penalties that would cause a power plant to say, oh, those penalties look too bad. I'm going to buy some oil instead. You see, but this isn't a market. Do you think this is a market where you're setting up a penalty to force a business to do something that it doesn't think is in its best interest? I mean, so people keep saying, oh, well, we have markets and markets will save us money. No, they're not saving us money.
Yeah, you write about this, that there's, the term deregulation gets thrown around, but it seems to be that these quote unquote deregulated ones, there's more regulation going on than there otherwise would have been to begin with. And is that what's making some of this so complex, being the feature?
Yes, it is. It is indeed. There was an article a couple of years ago by a regulator who wrote, "Can electricity ever be a market?" And he pointed out that what they call tariffs, which is just kind of the rules, the tariffs for the deregulated part of the market were 3 times as long as the tariffs for the regulated parts. I mean, so you have this forest of rules, and it's hard to figure out your way around them.
Yeah, it's and you've mentioned this is, I think, what got Rick Perry in trouble, and you kind of touched upon it just a minute ago, is something about you can't favor one type of fuel over the other. The rule or the regulation is that they're all equal. Well, obviously they're not. Is that part of what's a problem as well then?
Oh yeah, it's part of the problem is that I make a bunch of joking remarks about it in my book. I said Perry's problem was he named that fuel. He shouldn't name the fuel. Yes. And but it is the problem that they're supposed to treat everything as equivalent, but of course they can't, and of course they don't. Yeah. And so what happens is there's this push-pull business going on about how to write the rules so things are equivalent, how to write the rules so that the power plants will decide that it's in their best interest to store oil on site. So how to write the rules so that, I mean, it's just the thing, from my point of view, what was going on here is that the grid can't really be a system where 5-minute auctions, who gets you the best price in the next 5 minutes, runs it. And that's how it is now. It's the energy auction, at least in New England, is 5 minutes at a time. Bid in for the next 5 minutes. And, we need something more reliable than that. I mean, let's say that a plant stores fuel on site and it's a little more expensive than a plant that doesn't. That doesn't mean we don't need that plant. And we're not going to pay that plant because another plant beat it in the 5-minute auction.
Right.
I got to tell you guys about a great sponsor of the Counterflow podcast, and that is Paloma Verde over at palomaverdestore.com. They sell wonderful CBD products. I'm not kidding. I used their CBD. It's like a cool menthol sports cream. I put it on my lower back the other day because I had some back pains. The stuff works unbelievably. Right then and there, I was so glad that these guys are sponsors of the show. I had to make this commercial, a new one for these guys, just to rant and rave about that sports cream. It's unbelievable. They've got CBD gummies, CBD pet products, of course. Of course, they've got the CBD tinctures, some soft gels, some salve. I've also used the melatonin CBD soft gels, and they're quite good as well. Nothing's quite like that sports cream to me. Nothing. It's just unbelievable. I almost wanted my back to hurt again so I could use it some more. Carlos and Vanessa out of San Antonio, Texas, this is their store. It's a small business. They're willing to sponsor a show like this. They want to give you guys a discount. So when you use promo code BUCK, B-U-C-K, you'll get 25% off of your order if it's over $75. And if it's your first order, sign up for their email list. That's an extra 10% off, combined to a total of 35% off. These guys are wonderful people out of San Antonio, Texas. Support them. It supports this show as well. PalomaVerdeStore.com, promo code BUCK, B-U-C-K, at checkout. And I'm telling you, get that sports cream. You will not be sorry. Let's get back to the show.
So I think one way to help people understand what's going on, we live in the social media world. I want to read just a couple of things I've read that are being said. This is the problem, or here's what would fix this problem. And if we can, have you kind of fact check it or say, yeah, that's correct, or no, here's where they're wrong.
Okay.
If Texas were more reliant on wind turbines, we would be better off than we currently are.
No, that's not right. I'm sorry to say that. The Texas wind turbines, I mean, if you begin reading about it, somebody said, well, those Texas wind turbines were offline. And then other people say, well, of course they were offline. They're always offline to some extent in the winter. We get this much amount of power in the summer and we get that much in the winter. So how would more reliant on them have help? You say, well, we would build enough wind turbines so that during the winter we'd still get this much, and then what do you do with them in the summer? What I'm trying to say is that would be a very uneconomical thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if you have as a worldview that being reliant on wind turbines is a virtue that nothing else can match, mm-hmm. then you might say, well, of course you just build them. What are you doing? You're complaining about money.
Right.
Don't you understand that money isn't that important? And I'm like, it actually is that important. But the thing is that if you try to be reliant on wind turbines, you would find yourself very much overbuilding them and very much using them only a portion of the time in the summer. And it would be really kind of not a good scene at all. Okay, next question.
Next one. Okay. This is a similar one, and I've seen these are being posted now in memes and pictures. Wind turbines would work just fine if we knew what we were doing in Texas. Look at all the cold states and countries that use them.
Well, yes and no. I mean, to be blunt about it, Texas wind turbines were not set up for cold weather, and that's one of the reasons they weren't working. Mm-hmm. And so wind turbines would have been much better if Texas had set up to use cold weather wind turbines. But that, to set them up for use in cold weather, I mean, they're not separate kind of turbine. They're just set up with different fluids and different de-icing regimes or whatever for cold weather. And Texas doesn't do that. Now, you have to understand that you can say that, and you can say we should build our wind turbines to the specifications of the wind turbines in Norway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's going to be an expense, right? I mean, why didn't you do that in the first place? If it was cheaper, you would have done it.
Yeah.
If someone said, hey, we're going to build Norway-style wind turbines here, and it's going to be much cheaper because insulating them against cold weather outages is just free, you would have done it. And so the idea is, I mean, sometimes I compare this to the following. It is well known that on occasion, very rare occasions, thank heavens, airplanes crash, and sometimes they crash into areas that people are living in. Does that mean that I should put an airplane resistant structure above my house?
Right.
I mean, you have to look at the cost, the probability, and so forth. And so the fact that Norway can run wind turbines a certain way, and besides which, Norway, let me put it, Norway has a lot of hydro. And so Norway can back up its wind turbines with hydro, and it also has, I think it still has North Sea gas. So when you say everybody, they can run it, I'm like, yeah, well, okay. But, Texas doesn't look like Norway. Nobody would land in Norway and think it looks just like Texas.
Yeah. All right. Fossil fuels and nuclear energy failed Texas.
Well, nuclear energy did great. One plant was down for, one of your 4 plants was down for 36 hours or something like that. What I'm trying to say is that it was doing fine, and the nuclear plants went through hurricanes and everything like that. No plant is perfect, and let's put it this way: if the wind turbines had the same percentage availability as the nuclear plants did, that would have been very nice. If they were running it at 70% of their power the whole time, that would have been nice. But they were running it more like 20%. Now, in terms of the fossil fuels failing Texas, no, really, the fossil fuels were basically doing what they could, considering that they had not set up for fuel supply in cold weather, and that was the major problem. And so I don't know about this fossil fuels failed Texas. I mean, if Texas had only had wind turbines, Texas would have been in even worse trouble.
Okay. Well, you're so good at this. You've already answered my next couple. So we can move on from the crazy things I read online. Thanks for doing that little segment. If our power plants were all nuclear generated and managed correctly, would this have been avoided? Could this have been avoided in that case?
The answer is that if you have this generation of nuclear plants, you could have avoided almost all of this. And if you had a more modern generation, yes. But the thing about nuclear plants is that they run very steadily. And so what's best for a grid would be nuclear plants running what's called at the base load. That is, they just keep running. And then you would have natural gas, maybe oil, solar that followed the load. You understand, in the morning, at 5 in the morning, there's not as much demand for electricity as there is at 2 in the afternoon.
Right.
And so you need plants that move up and down. Now, France has its nuclear plants following load, and they're the same as we have here, so we could do it. But I'm not sure I would. First of all, I like a mixed grid. I like a grid where there's a couple kinds of plants, so that there can't be a really It's like, oh my gosh, they all had X problem. Now, nuclear plants are very unlikely to all have a problem at the same time because they use manufactured fuel that's been that has been quality controlled. They're all, they're very well designed. They have extensive protocols that people are trained to use them. So they if it was all nuclear, I guess Texas could have been fine. I would just say that I would prefer, even though I'm totally pro-nuclear, I would like to see nuclear plus some other kinds for the load following, just because it's to me, different things online is a more robust system, different types of things.
Is there a priority placed on subsidizing renewables over?
Okay.
There is.
Oh, why do people always want to make me feel unhappy?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying, look, what happens is that here's a wind turbine. A wind turbine is probably getting depends on when it was built, okay? It's probably getting between 1 and 2 cents per kilowatt hour for, between 2 and 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour, I'm sorry, as a production tax credit, which means that it gets those 2.5 cents to apply to its federal taxes. So if you have a very wealthy and profitable company like Warren Buffett's company that owns a wind turbine, every time the wind turbine puts a kilowatt hour on the grid, that company gets 2.5 cents against its taxes. And the effect of this is that wind turbines can also sell what's called renewable energy certificates. Now, I don't know the deal in Texas that much, but in general, let's say there's a state, let's say Ohio, and it says, and the state says every utility in this state has to use 20% renewable energy. And then Ohio looks around and says, where is it? Where is it? We don't have it. Well, they don't go and build a whole bunch of renewable energy. They go to a place that has a lot of renewable energy, like Texas or Iowa, and they buy certificates. Mm-hmm. For renewable energy. And then they say, see, I bought this certificate. It's the equivalent of having renewable energy, but luckily it stores very nicely in a desk as opposed to having to break ground and build stuff. So the thing is that the renewables get out of market funding. That's what it's called. It's out of market, that it's outside the market, which means that the renewable can bid into the market at 0 cents. So here's the auction running, and it's going to take things from the cheapest to the most high priced. It's going to take things from the cheapest first, and then more expensive, and then more expensive, and it's going to fill the queue and with less expensive to more expensive to more expensive. The renewable can bid in at 0 cents. It can bid in at -1 cent. It can say, I'll pay you a penny per kilowatt hour to take my power. Mm-hmm. At which point, of course, no other plant can compete with that. I mean, can you imagine a really well-managed nuclear plant that makes power at like 2 cents per kilowatt hour? And here it is competing with a wind turbine, which says, I pay you a penny a kilowatt hour to take my power, because after all, once I pay that penny, I get 4 cents from selling my REC, and I get 2.5 cents from the production tax credit. I'm at 6 cents, and I only have to give the grid operator a penny. I'm good. You can't compete with that. That is the kind of subsidy you just can't compete with. And so if you ask, are renewables subsidized more than other plants? Yeah. Now, I have chosen, because you got a lot of it in Texas, I have chosen wind and production tax credits and so forth. I could give a whole other rant about a whole other discussion about about how net metered solar increases the price for other people that don't have net metered solar. But I don't necessarily want to do that right now. But yes, they are subsidized.
Okay, before we get out, I definitely need to let you plug away at your content. But before that, to kind of bottom line this, I just want to have you simplify a few big takeaways from what has happened here in Texas. So maybe just a few important, prioritized lessons learned from this experience.
Okay, lesson learned number one, in my opinion, is that if you're going to be very dependent on renewables and on just-in-time natural gas, which I don't recommend for a whole bunch of reasons, you at least have to do a whole bunch of stuff to make sure they can deal with extreme weather, because there's always going to be extreme weather one time or another. And the amount of suffering and death that happens because the grid goes down for long periods of time, the cost of winterizing is nothing in comparison with the kind of things that were going on in Texas. So the first thing is winterize. And the second thing is have as many plants on your system that have fuel stored on site as you can manage to have, because that just decreases the amount of pain you can get into. You see, because those guys will keep running. If you can't get natural gas, that's pain, a lot more pain. If it's all natural gas and you can't get the natural gas, that's a lot of pain. And basically, a third takeaway, but this gets to be very complicated, is, in my opinion, the auction system of RTOs is just a disaster from the get-go. It was cruising for a bruising. It was bound to fail. It was just not. It was not going to make it. And I could show you studies that show that in RTO systems are more expensive also, like ERCOT. I mean, ERCOT is not the most expensive one, but what I'm trying to say is running an RTO system does not save the consumer money. And I just wanted to put that out there too. So I guess the three are: try not to be overly dependent on natural gas plus renewables. And if you are overly dependent, winterize. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is have as many power plants on your system as you can manage that have fuel stored on site. And the third is reform the auction system. But that is a long-term thing that takes a lot of lawyers.
Yeah, and something that just popped in my mind, I don't like using the term deregulation in some of these instances, because when I think of the airlines deregulating, we got more consumer choice.
Yes.
And in this case, these RTOs, I don't believe are offering consumer choice in the true deregulation as it is in other areas.
That's absolutely true. And in my book, I say that. I say, I'm calling them the RTO areas because I don't like to call them the deregulated areas. They have longer tariffs than the vertically integrated areas. Very few of them offer very much consumer choice. There are areas where you can choose which of two providers or something, but most places you can't. And so I don't like. I think one of the things is that the word deregulated, that means that people are going to go like, yes, that's what we want. We want freedom, or whatever. So, but that isn't what is going on in this situation.
Yes, well put. And the use of words, it gets bastardized quite a bit. Unfortunately, to a lot of people's benefit sometimes, but not to ours. All right. As we close up here, Meredith, please plug your website, the book we've been discussing, your Twitter presence, anything you'd like.
Okay. Well, I will start with plugging the book, which has a very pretty cover, by the way, and a bit dramatic too. Shorting the Grid, The Hidden Fragility of Our Electric Grid. And I want to say that some of those things about it, full of sharp writing and engaging stories about the most hidden part of our grid. Some of the notes from the back cover. Okay. And then my name is Meredith Angwin. And luckily, once you know my name is Meredith Angwin, you can find me on the web at meredithangwin.com and at Twitter at Meredith Angwin. And Facebook, though, I'm on Facebook as Meredith Angwin, but I prefer that people sign up for Meredith Angwin author, because that's where I put all the energy stuff, because I have friends who really don't care about RTOs. I know that's shocking, but it's true.
Yeah, imagine that.
And they want to hear about, things I'm doing or what my family's doing or whatever. So,
yes, it's good.
Meredith Angwin author on Facebook. And I'm also on LinkedIn.
All right. Well, I will link to all of these in the show notes page for this episode. Mrs. Meredith Angwin, thank you so much for doing this on such quick notice. The information that you can put out there is so valuable right now in my state. So I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah.
Okay. I am so thankful that she was able to do that. I hope that helps you guys, because as you know, there's all kinds of misinformation being pumped out by people on social media, and it's not helpful, of course. And you get in the world of social media now, all of a sudden you've got your room temperature IQ friends thinking that they're experts on what's happening with any given thing, what's going to happen next week that we've never experienced before. Well, I'm sure some of those friends are going to have the least of sharp opinions on that. So I'm here to give you guys the information of what's really going on and trying to get expert voices on things when they happen. And I'm glad Meredith was able to come on, and I was able to get this episode out in a timely fashion. As for me, this is a bonus episode, but I'll still give you the rundown on where to find me at Buck Rebel, BuckRebel on Twitter. You can find, we still got the old page up, the address, death-to-tyrantspodcast.com, but it's been redone with the Counterflow rebrand. So go there and you can find all of our episodes. Of course, go to any podcatcher. We got everything up there as well. And let's see, my Telegram group, it's blowing up. Telegram group, the app. Find Counterflow with Buck Johnson group and join in the fun. Until next time, thank you guys for joining me for this bonus episode. I will talk to you soon.
You get split in fucking half, like on the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.
This has been the Counterflow Podcast, a part of the Renegade Media Network.